Yeah, so I just want to address basically this kind of issue, or this kind of, I guess, this understanding that Muslims have that they'll often, push forth, which is that the God of the Quran, Allah, is the same God that Jesus preached, as well as the previous patriarchs, that they preached Allah. Um, I think that that's a very deceptive false statement because of the fact that if you go to something like Al-Ma'idah 18 in the Quran, it says that Allah cannot be viewed as a father and we cannot be viewed as his children. Okay? Now, in that particular surah and ayat, it does say that this is something that the Christians and the Jews believe, that God can be viewed as a father, right? A divine father, a universal divine father who views us as his children since he has created us and he is conceived or conceptualized within this paradigm of a divine, father, right, who provides for his children. Now, his true children are those, of course, who have accepted him and are adopted into his family through faith. But even for those who have not accepted them, as Matthew chapter 5 tells us, he's impartial towards the showing of mercy and love that he has upon all of his creation, since at the end of the day they're still his children. Now, they're not adopted into his family by faith at that point if they haven't accepted him, but he still views them in a loving and caring way because at the end of the day he created them and he is a parental father in the divine sense. Um, so there's obviously a conflict there, and there's obviously a deception within that statement when a Muslim says, "Well, they're the same God." Well, no, that's completely false. Because if you look at the synoptics and you look at John and you look at how Jesus perceives God, he does not perceive the God of the Quran. He does not conceptualize that God. Since the God of the Quran is merely a distant transcendent who is the overseer of all of creation without really being in any way intimately involved with it. In other words, in the Quranic sense, because the focus is absolutely on the transcendence of God, conceptualized within this notion of Tawhid, you cannot perceive God in a simple way. God cannot have an intimate relationship with you as a creature where he views you as his child and he is your father, that the one that you're to confide in, the one that you are to go to when you have troubles, and that he will communicate with you on a one-on-one basis in a very private sense. Now that's what Jesus tells you in Matthew. That's what Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 6 when he says, "Go to your room, lock the door and pray in secret to your Father who is in secret." Um, so Jesus creates a very intimate Father who's not just the universal Father over all of creation, but who also seeks and desires a one-on-one intimate relationship with his son and daughter. With a son or daughter, those are those who come to him in faith and have accepted him as their Father and recognize his parental authority over us. But in again, framed within this parental sense, this really intimate parental sense. That's the type of God that Jesus conceptualizes. He really conceptualizes a father, a divine father, who is the ultimate embodiment of fatherhood, of parenthood, who does view us as his children and who does seek to have an intimate relationship with us where he can provide us with our spiritual needs and whatever it is, that we're struggling with spiritually, that he can alleviate those issues for us and he can provide for us and care for us and love us. That's not the God of the Quran, because if you come out with that statement, then you have to say to the Muslim, well, okay, this is how Jesus conceptualized God as a father. Can I call Allah my father, and does Allah view me as his child, and in an intimate sense that we have that father son dynamic? And they'll say no, no, you cannot view God in that way. That's blasphemy. Well, there you go. I mean, the answer is quite simple there, because the Quran makes it very clear that God is so far removed from his creation and so far above his creation. It doesn't mean he doesn't provide for his creation. It just means that he cannot be viewed in that very close, simple way, right? Because the Christian understanding is that God is both simple and complex. Yes, he is the transcendent and he is above all, but even though he is above all, he has made himself accessible, right? And he has done so through interacting with us on an intimate level. He's brought himself down to us so that he can be with us. That's not the Quranic God in any shape or form. And the God of both the Old and New Testament is framed in that particular way. So when they come and they tell you, well, it's the same God, it's not. That's a completely false statement, and it's something to be wary of. I mean, it's a lie, and it's deceiving, and it's also found in the sense that often they will say, well, we worship, or sorry, not that we worship, but we obey and we follow the same prophets that you do, right? And they'll go through the list: Abraham, Isaac, Moses, Jacob, so on and so forth, as far as Jesus. They say the only difference is we have one more prophet than you do. Well, see, this is the problem, is that the Quran, yes, these figures that we have in the Bible, they appear by name, but not by character. And that's the important difference. So the Jesus of the Quran is not the Jesus of the Bible. The Abraham of the Quran is not the Abraham of the Bible. According to the Quran, Abraham sacrifices Ishmael. According to the Bible, he sacrifices Isaac. Right? Now, historical tradition tells us that the sacrifice was of Isaac, not Ishmael. So again, now there's been speculation over why the Quran changes it to Ishmael. One of the interpretations there's a perception that because Muhammad was of the line of Ishmael, they obviously brought it back to Ishmael to place greater emphasis and importance on Ishmael in order to elevate the status of Muhammad. Now, according to the Bible, we know that that's not the case, and we know that the descendants of Ishmael were actually, in some sense, I guess in some sense they were not the chosen people. They rather had a kind of a worse fate in store for them because of the fact that they were not the true kind of son of Abraham, the only begotten son of Abraham, in the sense of, Isaac being the actual true son from his actual wife, as opposed to being from a slave woman, which obviously Ishmael is, if I'm not mistaken, he's born through Hagar, because at the time Sarah, I think it's Sarah, was not able to have children until the Lord made it possible for her. So Ishmael wasn't the promised child to Abraham, through whom his descendants would be made as numerous as the stars in the sky, which is what we're told in Genesis chapter 15. But rather, that is Isaac. Isaac is that prophesied son. But yeah, the point here is that the way the Bible portrays these people, it portrays them far different, to the point that they're not the same person. As I said, the Abraham of the Bible is not the Abraham of the Quran, and vice versa. And that applies to every single person that appears by name. Again, the similarity ends with the names. That's it. But by character, it's not the same. So when a Muslim says, well, we follow the same people that you do, that you guys do. Well, that's not true. They don't. They follow them by name, but not by character, because the people that appear, the patriarchs that appear in the Quran, are not the same person. They're a completely different person. So the Jesus of the Quran, for example, was not crucified, okay? He did not die through crucifixion. Whereas the Jesus of the Bible does, right? The Jesus of the Quran preaches a completely different God than the Jesus of the Bible does. As I said, the Jesus of the Bible preaches a God who is a father. The Jesus of the Quran preaches a God who's so distant and far removed from creation that we just have to kind of worship that which we do not know, because he's so incomprehensible, right? Which is actually quite funny, because the Jesus of the Bible actually speaks out against worshipping that which you do not know. The point that Jesus makes in the Bible is that he is a father who has made himself known through me, since I'm the only one who knows him. That's what he tells us in Matthew chapter 11, right? No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and only those whom the Son chooses to reveal him. The point being that God has been made known through his Son, through his eternal Son. So, it's just something to be wary of. So when you hear that argumentation, well, we follow the same Jesus and the same patriarchs, well, they don't. Because the patriarchs in the Quran, for example, the prophets that they believe were sinless. We know from the Bible that that's not the case. We know that they were sinful. Yes, they were prophets and they were chosen by God, but they were still sinful and in need of redemption. They were in need of a savior. And that applies to all of them. The only one that was sinless was Jesus, right? That's what 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 22 tells us, that he was without sin. and he lived the perfect life. But there's a massive difference between Jesus and, you know, everyone that came before him. Jesus was the true Son of God, the eternal Son of God. Um, but yeah, it's just something to be mindful of and to keep in mind that, you know, when you hear that argumentation, when you hear them raise that point, oh well, we worship, you know, the same, or sorry, we follow the same, you know, prophets that you do. Well, they don't. Yes, by name they're the same, but by character they couldn't be more different, right? As I said, in the Quran, they're sinless. In the Bible, we know that they were sinful, right? Moses kills a man. You know, Noah gets drunk in a vineyard. Solomon goes after foreign women when he was told not to. David commits one of the worst forms of adultery. You know, Jonah was told something by God and he completely ran in the other direction and disobeyed him. Now, he did repent, obviously, but the point being that they're all guilty of some sin in some shape or form. Um, Whereas, as I said, in the Quran, they're perceived as sinless, right? And we know obviously from history that that's not the case. Um, but yeah, so as I said, when you hear these arguments, to be wary of them and to always remember, as I said, that the God that they perceive of the Quran is not the God that you worship in accordance with what the scriptures tells us. God in the scriptures is very, very different than the God of the Quran. The God of the Quran, as I said, he's a transcendent who's so far removed from his creation that we cannot know him in any real, meaningful, intimate sense, right? We just have to believe that he's there and he's doing what he's doing, but we can't really know truly what he's doing or what he's getting up to. Whereas the Bible tells us, yes, he is transcendent, he is above all, but he has made himself known, right? And that's the primary difference. And when I say made himself known, in a deep, meaningful, intimate sense, and he's made himself accessible, right? In the sense that anyone who comes to him in faith through his Son can have a meaningful, deep, you know, rich relationship with him. Yeah, so I think I'll just leave it at that.